Ahoy! We have a fair bit of new info about New World in terms of upcoming plans, for example weapon changes and many other things. Some of those updates are very recent and some are slightly older. I wanted to include them as well because I hadn't talked about them yet. For example, starting with this statement from Chades, we have a number of items such as Hades Fury, which is a Void Gauntlet with Keen and Putrefying Scream locked, so very nice one, that'll be fixed and upgradable with the Season 4 update. This missed our patch notes, but we're working on getting those added. If the other options here are as interesting as Hades Fury, this is definitely something to look out for. There were some interesting statements regarding certain perks. So somebody asked about Burning Smite not being included on PvE fails and if that's intended. And it was confirmed that this is in fact intended because it's a PvP only perk and this is apparently consistent with other perks. In that same context, Chazet also mentioned that critical retribution from PvE drops also feels bad and that's something that they want to correct. I think this is interesting because traditionally a lot of good drops from PvP have still come from PvE anyways, so I'm not sure how far this shift is supposed to go. Likewise, there are good items that you get from PvP that are very usable in PvE, so I don't necessarily see why this exclusion needs to be made here, but we'll see how they plan on filtering this. You may be aware that various bind on equip items can currently drop in a state where you cannot actually trade them with other players, either just right away as bind on pickup or showing as bind on equip and not being tradable. So they did intentionally change the frequency for bind on equip or bind on pickup respectively to drop, but this wasn't necessarily meant to target these items, I think, as far as I'm reading between the lines here. So they're making things like Chef's Shirt always bind on equip, but they don't have a timeline for this yet. They still love the idea of solo trials, and I really wish that they would stop answering that question over and over and instead answer some other questions, because we know that now. They're coming eventually. When asked about the current node distribution, they say we're near a point where we're happy with the new node quantity and resource distribution, but we're keeping an eye on that for both new materials and older tier 5 materials. And many of you may know that older tier 5 materials are actually the bigger bottleneck at the moment, so it's good they have an eye on that as well. They were asked if they're planning to make items that are locked behind the PvP track available in other ways for PvE players, and everyone in that company is apparently upset that they have to do PvP for rewards. I couldn't help but chuckle about that one a little bit because for the longest time it's been exactly the other way around, where PvPers very frequently have to do PvE content for specific good gear. So welcome to the struggle, I guess. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think that is just a part of MMOs that sometimes you'll be forced into activities that you don't necessarily want to do, that's not your priority, to get specific gear. The answer here is no plans to change the source of some of the rewards on the PvP track. Currently, PvE content has an ample amount of rewards that you can earn exclusively from those experiences. We want to continue to improve the rewards on the PvP track rewards so that PvP-focused players have great options for rewards, including armor, weapons, and cosmetics. And I think that's great because, again, for the longest time, there wasn't really much in the way of PvP when it came to gearing, and you pretty much had to either farm everything in PvE or craft it. So making this a bit more even grounds is totally fine in my opinion. What they are doing in the Season 4 patch, which is not mentioned here, is that they put all artifacts available from PvP track 20, which means you don't necessarily have to grind to track 100 to get your last artifact, though it might still take a while to get all of them. Ronji asked a very important question in my opinion, which is if we can get an update on the bad luck protection for artifacts, which was meant to be in Season 4. That was the answer in the October Q&A. They say they had originally planned for bad luck protection to come with Season 4, but they had to push this due to other priorities, which makes me wonder what was so much more important than that. In the meantime, they've increased the drop rate of artifacts from 10 to 20%. Artifact bad luck protection is still on their radar and internal roadmap, and they'll have more information for that in a future season. A future season, not necessarily the next one after. I don't know what's going on with that. I wonder why that is so complicated, considering they have already used bad luck protection in the past for events. So I'm really not sure what is so different about this. Sure, 20% drop chance is gonna make this a lot easier anyway, so that helps at least. And this has the upside of this not just affecting the open world PvE drops as far as I understand it, but apparently this is a 20% increase in general, so this would affect dungeons too, expeditions too, so maybe that's for the best. But still, the bad luck protection should really be there, just so you're not the unlucky one who has to farm one thing forever and ever. We get some info about influence races. Territories are grouped together in the schedule. For example, Evanscale, Windswood, Weaver's Fen, and Morningdale are always on the same day. In their most recent minor patch, they updated the races to have 4 a day, so basically a 3-day cycle of territories, which will make it more difficult for companies to hold more than 3 without risking double declaration. Each territory has a 6-day cycle of invasion, influence race, war, break day or reschedule day, influence race, war. In future updates, they could adjust which territories are grouped together or their values based on feedback. I think this isn't necessarily as simple as putting all of the highest value territories on the same day, because then you also have the issue of having to push 2 territories at once in the new system where they want to do 2 races at once. So I'm not really sure how exactly they're going to solve this. I actually thought that the system was smarter than that originally. I thought it was meant to put territories together that are owned by the same company, so it puts immediate pressure onto them if they own multiple. That doesn't really seem to be the case, but yeah, I guess that might also be a technological limitation. In this next statement, this is explained a little bit further. I'm not going to read the entire thing, but what they do say here is that they're always balancing the dream of being able to own all of Eternum and Wars as endgame PvP content with introducing new players to the territory game. This surprises me. I did not know that one of their goals was that it is possible for a company to own all of Eternum, and I'm not sure why that is important to them. And I can't see any logic as to why it would be. I think a balanced map would always be better in every regard, so I really don't understand why they have to balance between those 2 goals here, rather than just say, we want to have a balanced map, we don't want one company to own too many places, we don't want one company to be too dominant in general, because otherwise that company will just become your classic super company, which is what happens on a lot of servers, especially when there's not enough competition in there. So definitely a huge question mark for me here. We have a mention of the Firestaff and Musket reworks here, or kind of overhauls, and they're saying they still have plans to revisit previous weapons and do a refresh on them, focusing on playability and quality of life. Stay tuned for more information on these plans soon, so probably on the roadmap. There are a lot of possible contenders for this, so I'm not even going to try and guess. When it comes to artifact perks, they're trying to add perks that complement the playstyle the artifact is trying to define. For example, the Endless Thirst artifact is all about more powerful potions, so they wanted to tie more power into potion usage at the cost of potion frequency. So the associated perks tie into potion usage with empowering and fortifying toast. However, sometimes those thematic perks may not be quite up to par with other perk options. They're looking into these cases and will adjust over time, and that's good to hear, because I think on certain artifacts there are just some perks that aren't very high value. When it comes to the Musket in PvE, they want to do more to improve it. However, it has admittedly been a bit of a struggle to get into the right place, where it stands out from the bow, feels good for average players, and can feel effective for the really skilled players. However, with our ability to now increase weapon damage in PvE without affecting PvP, we're looking into adjusting the power of the musket and likely several other weapons down the road to increase viability. The ideal goal is that any weapon will feel effective in most areas, and the musket is definitely trailing behind in PvE. The next one I'm just going to read word for word without any judgment or interpretation. Quote, with the current state of all PvP modes heavily favoring range, and with the new bow artifact coming, will range finally see some balancing done? Reply, we are continually reviewing the power of ranged weapons in PvP. In OPR, we see a lot of ranged usage because of the layout of map and of its more solo-friendly way to achieve high scores in that mode. We don't necessarily feel it's OP versus other weapons, but agree it can feel oppressive when most of the opposing team is ranged and you are melee. With that said, we are actively reviewing the Boltcaster artifact and are going to make some changes before it goes live. Our goal is to give it a bit more focus and theme without creating gameplay that is overly annoying for opponents. I interpret that the likely outcome here is that the Boltcaster won't have a stun, or the stun will at least be nerfed or applied differently with something that is more tied to electricity somehow maybe. Following some of the concerns and some complaints on my last video regarding various things on the testing of Boltcaster, I am gonna do a follow-up video on that and show you some more things about the damage output specifically of Boltcaster, not so much the CC side. So if you're interested in that, consider subscribing, clicking the bell. That'll probably come tomorrow or the day after. So Martin asked about the new Lifestaff artifact and why it's basically so weird and not really useful for healing healers. And the response here was, our goal with artifacts is for these to be playstyle defining items. They should fundamentally adjust your playstyle and shift how you interact with the item and your build. For the Lifestaff, we wanted to try a different approach, making it more than just a weapon that heals. This might not be the Lifestaff artifact for all players, but we hope it finds its niche for some. In the future, we'll continue to experiment with new artifacts for gear, and we'll continue to see how we can make these define your playstyle. And they also have some other ideas for future healer Lifestaff artifacts. So this one is going to be interesting, and so far that we're also seeing the Ember Gem changes with the next season. And I wouldn't completely write off Vengeance anymore with that. There's some interesting things going on. I'm not sure if it will find its place, but we'll talk about the int gem scaling and everything in the next days, and maybe, just maybe, there is a reason why this was released or made at the same time as these gem changes, and maybe you can actually get value out of it somehow. We'll find out. But at the end of the day, you gotta keep in mind that for a lot of weapons, the ideal build is not the artifact. For example, currently when I'm running my Great Axe and Flail build, neither of those is using the artifact version, because in both cases they are worse for my purposes. When it comes to the new group finder system, you can currently queue with a group of 4 people, so you can not queue with a full group, but an almost full group. They don't really want to punish you for going with a full group and not using the group finder system, but rather compensate you for your time when you hit that random button and help players you haven't found the right company to go as a group with. For this reply, the linked question wouldn't show up, but going back through the questions, I'm fairly certain this was a question about a DPS meter. The response being, we're inclined on doing it long term, no immediate plans. With noting that our intent would be to make it opt-in, so you'd only be sharing your stats if you wanted to, which makes sense with what they've said in the past. But I'm just hoping we're getting it in general at some point. I've just told you which videos are coming in the next day, so I don't need to tell you again. But again, if you'd like to see those, consider subscribing and clicking the bell. If you'd like to support me further and get early tips and trading tips in return, you can do so on Patreon. Thanks to all of my patrons who already do exactly that, and thank you for watching. Sloth out.